The Pozzo family took over Watford FC in June 2012, and it's fair to say that there hasn't been a dull moment since. Here is every manager to have worked at Watford since the family took over and how long they managed to last in the job. Up first was Sean Dyche. Not technically a Pozzo appointment, Dyche was the Watford manager when they took over the club, and they wasted no time in sending him out the door. Despite leading Watford to an 11th placed finish in the Championship, their highest finish for 4 years, they sent him packing straight away. Gianfranco Zola was the man to replace him, and he lasted a total of 526 days, which is decent going by Watford manager standards. He led the club to a Championship playoff final and was the manager for the iconic The Hornets went on to lose the playoff final against Crystal Palace though, and Zola was gone before Christmas, leaving Watford in 13th place. Giuseppe Sannino was the next Watford manager in line, but he didn't fare much better. To say he's a managerial journeyman would be putting it lightly. He only lasted 256 days in the job and ultimately left because of unrest behind the scenes. Oscar Garcia was then given the gig, but he only took charge of 4 matches before he had to step down due to health reasons. He lasted just 27 days in the job. Billy McKinlay stepped up to the managerial role next, and he was given all of 8 days until he was given the chop. 2 games, 1 win and the draw was his final record at Watford. Watford needed someone to spearhead them to promotion, and Slavisa Jokanovic was that guy. He guided Watford to promotion as they finished second in the Championship behind Bournemouth, but if you thought he'd have some credit in the bank for the promotion, you'd be dead wrong. Less than a month after securing Watford's return to the top flight, Jokanovic was gone as he lasted a total of 266 days in the hot seat. Quique Sanchez Flores became the 5th Watford manager in just 12 months when he was appointed. The Spanish manager did a good job at Watford, to be fair, as he lasted 1 whole season, lost to Crystal Palace in the semi-final of the FA Cup, and guided Watford to a respectable 13th placed finish in the Premier League. 1 season was enough for him though, and he left at the end of the campaign and lasted a total of 365 days in the job. Walter Mazzari's reign at Watford was fairly uneventful compared to everyone else, but he did manage to beat the drop as they went on to finish 17th in the Premier League. The Pozzos were obviously not overly impressed with what they had seen though, and his contract was terminated at the end of the season, with him lasting a total of 365 days. Marco Silva was next up, and he had Watford as high as 3rd in the Premier League at one point. Everything seemed to be going swimmingly for the new gaffer. That was until Everton came knocking and Watford's form took a nosedive as a result. Silva was dismissed by Watford in January 2018, with the club claiming that the unwarranted approach by a Premier League rival had caused significant deterioration in both focus to the results and to the point where the long-term future of Watford FC had been jeopardised. Everton agreed to pay a £4 million compensation package, and Silva lasted a total of 239 days in the job. Javi Garcia was the next manager to take the reins, and he probably oversaw the best era of the Pozzo family ownership. The Spanish manager took Watford all the way to an FA Cup final and also guided them to their highest ever finish in over 3 decades as they finished 11th in the Premier League. With all he had achieved, his sacking was probably one of the most brutal by the club. Garcia was only given 4 matches of the 19/20 season before they decided to pull the trigger and fire him. He lasted a total of 594 days in the job. Quique Sanchez Flores was back for his 2nd spell in charge of Watford to replace him, but this one was a fairly short-lived sequel. The Spanish manager only lasted 85 days in the job before he was given the boot after only winning 2 of his 12 matches in charge. Watford then went ahead and hired Nigel Pearson as their 3rd manager of the season, and it wasn't even January yet. There were some signs of life under Pearson though. Watford managed a historic win over Liverpool that ended their unbeaten run in emphatic style. Pearson did have Watford outside the relegation zone on game week 36, but after a disagreement they decided to sack him with 2 games of the season to go. Pearson lasted 85 days in the job in total. Hayden Mullins then took over on a temporary basis and lost both matches in charge, which saw Watford relegated to the Championship. Vladimir Ivic was then the manager tasked with getting Watford back to the Premier League. Things seemed to get quite rocky for the manager after falling out with captain Troy Deeney though, and ultimately he was sacked after just 126 days in the job. Xisco Munoz took over from Ivic and he managed to spur this Watford side onto promotion. Following their promotion to the Premier League, Watford signed 13 new players in the summer, but the owners soon had a change of heart when it came to their manager. Xisco was sacked just 7 matches into their Premier League campaign, and he was in charge for a total of 287 days. Claudio Ranieri was the next manager through the door. In his first few matches, he oversaw wins against the likes of Everton and Manchester United, but things quickly turned sour for the Italian. Ranieri lasted a total of 112 days in the job, and after a woeful run of form, he was sacked by the club. From one experienced head to another, they then went ahead and appointed Roy Hodgson. He ultimately did little to inspire the group, and they went on to win just 2 of their remaining 18 matches of the season. Watford fell to a disappointing 19th placed finish, and Hodgson was shown the door at the end of the year. Back in the Championship, Watford then appointed Forest Green Rovers manager Rob Edwards. Hiring a young progressive English coach like Edwards seemed like it could have been a step in the right direction for Watford. Edwards brought new ideas to the club, and while there were some signs of what was to come, it was clear that he needed time and patience to implement his system, and those two things aren't exactly afforded to Watford managers these days. Despite looking like the ownership could have turned a corner with this appointment, they reverted to type and sacked him after just 10 games of the season, to the dissatisfaction of plenty of Watford fans. And so here we are. Slaven Bilic is the new Watford manager, and you probably wouldn't bet on him being a long-term stay at the club. Bilic's credentials in the Championship are superb, but this brutal ownership has proven that it only takes one bad run to be shown the exit door. Bilic has now become the 19th permanent manager since the Pozzos took over back in June 2012. That means they have hired an average of 1.9 managers each year since they've been in charge, which is by far and away the most in England. Watford will no doubt continue to be crazy, and your guess is as good as mine with how long Bilic will manage to last in the job. But there we have it, guys. There was a brief sort of history of the Pozzo ownership at Watford, how many managers they've gone through and how they all sort of fared. I'm not going to lie, the Rob Edwards news did come as somewhat of a shock to me. It's never all too shocking when it's Watford because we know their past, but I did think that maybe Edwards could have been that manager to go ahead and break the mould. The fact that he was a different profile of manager than they usually go after. Foolishly from my part, I thought that maybe he might have been afforded a little bit more time because of that, but in the end they've decided to chop him, and I was quite sad to see him go, really, not given anywhere near enough time in the job. As it goes, I think that Slaven Bilic is a pretty good appointment. Obviously he's got a great track record in the Championship, enjoyed watching that West Brom squad that he got up, but there has been method in the madness to this chopping and changing that Watford have done in years gone by, but it just feels like it's getting to a point now where that's no longer the sustainable strategy that it once was, given some of the managers that they have gone through recently. And yeah, it'll be fascinating to see how this era ends for Watford, I suppose, and what Bilic is able to deliver in the job. That'll wrap it up for today's video though, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you did go to enjoy, do leave a like and stick around for some regular Championship content, and I'll see you all in the next one.